As the nation seems preoccupied with Theresa Mannion remixes or whatever is in vogue this week, the Irish reaction to the so-called migrant crisis and dissolution of our culture seems to be lagging behind the rest of the world. We look out into the abyss of the internet and find very few of our own. We look out into the streets and see no public response to the status quo. It can be disheartening to see. Our problem is rooted in ignorance. Not so much ignorance of racial and cultural differences with the migrants, but an ignorance of the history that we've been roped into and that we've had no part in creating. The segments of our population who would normally react to this crisis have not been informed that Ireland has been assimilated into Greater Europe and is expected to take on the responsibility and adopt orphans that we've supposedly created when we destroyed the Levant in Africa. If they were aware of this, we would see thousands of Irish out in the streets and a much more manicured version of Identity Ireland with a swelling support base. The people who we share the greatest similarity with in both genetics and historical perspective are the people of Eastern Europe. Countries like Poland and Czechoslovakia. These nations, unlike their neighbours, are showing a great resistance to the EU mandate to equally shoulder the burden of cultural suicide. Just like us in Ireland, these people have a long history of struggle for finding their own sovereignty and identity, and are used to ruling themselves as opposed to deferring authority to international agreements or larger federations. Their identity is derived from their people and their small nation states rather than vague ideologies. While post-World War II Europe has been shoehorning itself into dreams of brotherhood of all men, they've been keeping it real, either in the trenches of civil war or in the struggle for economic development. This incubated a sense of identity that Ireland has been deprived of through the artificiality of EU membership. But this artificiality is only about 2 generations old. We may be getting high right now off of Ireland's Got Talent and iPhones, but the struggle for self-definition hasn't died just yet. More and more, with every passing day, young Irish men and women are waking up from that daze. And if you're listening to the sound of my voice in January of 2016, these people are waiting for you to show them the ropes. In the minds of these young people, there's a voice calling them back to an Irish identity that is currently obscured by the fog generated from the false inflation of EU and IMF money. The only things that separate us from our brothers and sisters in East Europe are architectural eyesores, an overly generous welfare state, and shiny new railway stations. Despite the lies peddled by our government and liberal media, our youth are waking up to this Faustian deal. This is where you come into play, dear listener. The responsibility lies with you to start speaking up online and in the high street before the voices of Islam and Marxism get to those vulnerable ears first with quasi-legitimate claims of materialism being at the root of our disintegrating social fabric. Right now our youth have nothing but reaction to the migrant invasion, but reaction simply isn't enough. We need to communicate. We need to speak to each other. We need to get out on the streets, us, ourselves, those of us who are aware today, because, again, if you're listening to my voice in January of 2016, you've more than likely given yourself an extensive education as to what our little island faces. You know the dangers that we face. You also know the potentiality that our little island has. Get out on the streets, speak to your fellow Irishmen, make YouTube videos, make blog posts, do everything that you can, no matter how rudimentary, because your voice is needed right now. We live in a society where we've been beaten over the head repeatedly with a loser mentality. We've been shown again and again that we cannot put up a fight, that all of our uprisings and all of our bids to find justice just end up in apathy again and again and again. But that is the narrative, that's the fairy tale that our ruling elite are shoving down our throats. It is not the truth, it is not reality. We Irish are made of finer stuff. The trick is to realize that we are under that spell, that we are being sold that narrative, so that we know that we don't need to relive it over and over again.